What's up, YouTube? This is Too Raw for TV. So this next guy I'm talking about here, right? He got brought up in my mind when I was debating ranking Mark Jackson with other point guards in the late '80s through the '90s, and I said to myself, "That's right. I meant to do a video about this guy, Mark Price." Now, I think pretty much it's pretty much going to be a universal agreement with this that Mark Price is uh, a much more deserving candidate for the Hall of Fame than Mark Jackson. Now, all due respect to Mark Jackson, I was weighing it. He did finish in assists real high, but I think that's more of a longevity achievement than him being just a dominant player. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, he was a fine player, but I just don't see Hall of Fame. Mark Price, although it's no slam dunk case, to me, if injuries didn't derail this man's career, right? If injuries didn't derail this man's career, I think that Mark Price could have had a career comparable to a Steve Nash in achievements. But one thing he would have had on his resume, I think, over Nash, if it wasn't for Michael Jordan and the Bulls being in the way, he would have had at least one NBA Finals appearance. Talking about Mark Price. I think that '92 team would have went to the finals. Now, whether they were beating Portland or not, I'm not certain of that. Okay, I'm not certain about whether or not they would have beaten Portland in the NBA Finals. I tend to want to believe that they would have lost, but anyway, Mark Price, man, he's one of those guys where when you look at his career numbers, cumulative, like total, they don't blow you out of the water because of the fact that number one, he played on some pretty solid teams. I don't want to say loaded, but solid. So his scoring numbers, especially when you consider the era, if he played in today's era, Mark Price would have put up much more impressive numbers. Um, the way that offenses are geared now towards scoring point guards and guys that could shoot, this era would have been tailor made for Mark Price. But alas, he played 30 years before his time, maybe. You know what I'm saying? But the thing about Mark Price, you don't look at the total numbers, you look at what he was able to accomplish. And he was drafted 25th overall from Georgia Tech in the second round. He was he was no blockbuster prospect going into that draft. He was drafted by the Mavericks, but he was traded to the Cavaliers as draft pick. And from then on, it was, for a brief period of time, a borderline Hall of Fame career for Mark Price. He was a four-time NBA All-Star. He had one first-team All-NBA selection, 1992-93. Three times he was on a third-team All-NBA selection. He led the NBA in free throw percentage three times. 10 times. All right, excuse me, four times. He was in the top 10 in three-point field goals made during his career. Three times he finished in the top 10 with three-point field goal percentage. Seven times in his career, he was in the top 10 in free throw percentage for a season. And in assists, four times he was top 10 in assists for a season. His 90.4% shooting percentage from the foul line was number one overall at the time of his retirement. And it was number one overall until just a few seasons ago when Stephen Curry just edged him All right. Steph Curry, I think, is like at 90.5%. So Mark Price is now second, all right, in his overall career in free throw percentage. And for his career, he shot over 40% from three, 40.2%, which was a remarkable percentage for his era. You know what I'm saying? Like, if you look at the 3-point shooting percentage in the early 90s, the league average was about 32, 33%. And he was shooting between 38 to 43% from three. And you look at today's NBA guys are shooting about 36%, 37% from three, a substantial improvement over the early 90s. You really saw the jump in percentage starting in the mid 90s. Um, so in today's NBA, man, I just would think Mark Price, his shooting numbers would be like Steph Curry's, man. I'm not saying he would be as prolific. I'm not saying he's as good as Steph Curry, but his numbers would be somewhat similar as far as shooting percentages. Um, Mark Price was pretty much considered the best shooter in basketball in the early to mid 1990s. I would say he was the best shooter in the NBA from like 90 to 93 ish, somewhere around that time. He was the best shooter in the league. And then I would say afterward, as injuries took a toll on him, he was out the league by I think 1998. But then I would say guys like Reggie Miller, guys like Glenn Rice, Dennis Scott, although they weren't, with some of them, maybe they weren't the overall shooters like that Price was, like all over the floor. You know what I'm saying? Some of them were more 3-point specialists. You know what I'm saying? But like a George McLeod, he was known more for being a outside just 3-point specialist, but still. Um, but Mark Price for a while was that guy, man. Um, Twice also, he was the NBA 3-point shootout champion 2 years in a row, 1993 and 94. He became the second member of the 50-40-90 club, the first one being Larry Bird. That is the club that has had a season shooting at least 50% from the floor, 40% from three, and 90% from the foul line. I'm trying to think of everybody that's done that. I know Chris Middleton was doing it this year. I know that Steve Nash has done it. Um, Steph Curry has done it. Uh, I'm not sure about Dirk. Dirk may have done it, but I'm not certain about that. But there's been a couple other guys that have done it too. I just can't think on top of my head. And Mark Price's number 25 is retired not only by the Cleveland Cavaliers, but also by the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. And he was the ACC Rookie of the Year in 1983. Three times he was first team All AFC, and he was third team All American in 1986. Twice third team All American for UPI. Um, Third team All American for Associated Press. Second team All American for NABC. Consensus second team All American 1985. So you look at his what he was able to do, man. He won gold in the Pan American Games in 1983, Caracas. In the FIBA World Championship in 1994, he won gold. Um, is he a Hall of Famer? You know, if I have to go by what my standards are, no. Okay. Um, I I can't say that he's a Hall of Famer. Um, if you look at the one thing that would help him better is if he played a little bit longer. Like, for instance, his rookie year, he played 67 games. His second year, he played 80 games. It's the most he would ever play in a season. His third year, he played 75 games. His fourth year, he played 73 games. The 90-91 season, he only played in 16 games that year. In 92, he played 72. In 93, he played 75. In 94, he played 76 games. Okay? In 95, he played in 48 games. All right? The next year, he played with the Bullets. He only played in 7 games. In 97, he played in 70 games with the Warriors. And then in 98, his last year in the NBA, he played in 63 games. If he was able to play, I don't know, man, maybe another 2 to 3 years on a good team, it's just hard. It's hard for me to say that he is a definitive Hall of Famer. Um, he's another example of a guy whose legacy overall was marred by Michael Jordan. You know what I'm saying? Like, let's say that the Cavaliers were able to go to the finals in 1992. And let's say they were somehow able to win the championship. Let's say they beat the Portland Trail Blazers in that finals. How exactly would we look at Mark Price? As a matter of fact, an even better example is, what if Michael Jordan had missed that shot that won the series in '89? That shot pretty much changed the trajectory of both franchises. At that time, many people felt the Cleveland Cavaliers were the team of the future in the Eastern Conference, not the Chicago Bulls. That's when Jordan and his teams were still derided as Michael and the Jordanaires. You know what I'm saying? Cleveland, this is team basketball. A scoring champion can't win titles, and he's selfish, and you're never going to win like that. And during the regular season, I've said this before, in 88, 89, the Cavaliers beat the Chicago Bulls 6-0 in that season. Okay? But the playoffs were something different, right? But what if, Cleveland still had the psychological edge, and they still wound up being the team of the future, and they wound up being a team of the 90s. What if they won a couple titles? What if they won one in, 91 and 92? So how would we look at Mark Price differently? It'd be harder to argue against him then, especially if he won like a couple of finals MVPs or whatever. At the end of the day, I think he's a better candidate than Mark Jackson. But I can't quite put him in the hall. If Mark Jackson was, let's say, the Hall of Fame bus was pulling off right from the station, and Mark Jackson is running after it, right? Mark Jackson would be like where the rear tire is on that bus, like running for it. Like that's the closest he's gonna get. Mark Price would be right out of the sight of the bus driver. Like, you know what I'm saying? He's reaching, he's doing everything he can to get the attention of the Hall of Fame bus driver, but he just isn't quite seeing him. You know what I'm saying? That's where I would put Mark Price at. He was a hell of a player. Had a hell of a peak. You look at his career numbers, his career averages, which are more favorable for him than cumulative totals. If you look at his career averages, he averaged, excuse me. Now, Mark Jackson was 9.6 points, 3.8 rebounds, 8 assists. Mark Price is 15.2 points, 2.6 rebounds, and 6.7 assists. But if you look at, wait a minute, let me see something. If you look at from his third season through 94, so that's a six, what would that be? A 6 year stretch. For that 6 year stretch, Mark Price averaged 18.2 points, 2.9 rebounds, 8.2 assists, 1.4 steals, 49% shooting from the floor, a little under 41% from three, and 91.5% from the foul line. And I think it was also Mark Price. I think it's him. Um, doesn't he still hold the record for most consecutive free throws? Or is that Michael Williams that's done it? Let me see. I know that Mark Price had the record. I don't know if he still has it or not. Let me see something. No, he doesn't have it. He doesn't have it. He did have it at one point. The record is Michael Williams. It's Michael Williams with 97. But I remember Mark Price had. I think he made like at one point like 79 or 80 in a row or something like that. But that's since been broken by various players like Michael Williams, which might have been like the next year, and then Jose Calderon did it some years ago, and then Dirk and Abdul Rauf did it. Yeah, but Mark Price, he's just not he's not quite a Hall of Famer, but he's a more deserving selection in my opinion than Mark Jackson. But tell me what you guys think. All right.